I held the lawyer's letter in my trembling hands, reading the words over and over until they blurred. My husband's will had been changed. My name, carefully written in his shaky handwriting just months before he died, had been replaced. The house we'd lived in for 43 years, the home where we raised our son, where Paul took his last breath holding my hand, was no longer mine. And the signature at the bottom, dated 3 days before his death when he could barely lift a spoon to his mouth, looked exactly like his. My son Brian stood in the doorway of what used to be my kitchen, his face carefully arranged into something that might pass for sympathy if you didn't know him the way a mother knows her child. He said the words that would haunt me for months. "Mom, Dad wanted it this way. The house needs to be in my name for tax purposes. You understand, don't you? It's still the family home. Nothing's really changing. But everything had changed, and that was just the beginning of my plan. Let me take you back to when my world still made sense, to the days when I believed that family was sacred and love was enough. My name is Margaret Hayes. I'm 70 years old, and for 47 years I taught American literature at Roosevelt High School. I loved my job, truly loved it. There's something magical about watching a 16-year-old discover that words on a page can crack open their heart and show them who they might become. I taught Steinbeck and Fitzgerald, Toni Morrison, and Maya Angelou. I taught my students that literature isn't about memorizing dates and titles. It's about recognizing yourself in someone else's story. I retired at 65, tired but content, ready to spend my remaining years with Paul, the man I'd married when we were both 23 and too young to understand what forever really meant. Paul was a civil engineer, the kind of man who could look at empty land and see a bridge, a school, a future. He was quiet and methodical, the type who measured twice and cut once, who never made a promise he couldn't keep. He had steady hands and a steadier heart. For 47 years, he was my anchor. We had one son, Brian, born when I was 28 and still believed that love and good intentions were enough to raise a child right. Maybe they aren't. Maybe I missed something crucial along the way, some essential lesson about gratitude or integrity. Or maybe some people are just born looking for shortcuts, even through their own family. The last 5 years of Paul's life were the hardest we'd ever faced together. Parkinson's disease took him piece by piece, stealing his steadiness first, then his confident hands, finally his voice. I cared for him at home because that's what you do when you've built a life with someone. You don't abandon them when the building starts to crumble. You shore up the walls and hold on tight. Our house on Maple Street became our entire world. I learned to help Paul with things he'd done independently for 70 years, buttoning shirts, cutting food, walking from the bedroom to the bathroom without falling. Each loss hurt him more than the disease itself. I could see it in his eyes, the frustration and shame of needing help with the basics of being human. But we had routines that kept us going. Every morning, I'd make coffee and read him the newspaper. Every afternoon, we'd sit in the sunroom and listen to jazz records, Miles Davis and John Coltrane, the music of his youth. Every evening before bed, I'd read to him, usually Hemingway or Raymond Carver, stories with clean lines and clear truths. Brian visited once a month, sometimes less. He lived 2 hours away in the city with his wife Diane and our grandson Daniel, who was 12 and growing up into someone I barely knew. Brian had a good job in finance, the kind that came with a nice car and even nicer excuses. "Too busy, Mom. Big presentation coming up. Daniel has soccer. You understand." I understood that my son had become a stranger in an expensive suit. When Brian did visit, he'd spend most of the time on his phone, checking emails, taking calls in the next room. Diane would sit on the edge of the couch looking uncomfortable, as if illness might be contagious. Daniel would fidget with his phone, counting the minutes until they could leave. Only once did Brian ask if I needed help. Financial help, he meant. I told him we were fine. Paul's pension and my retirement savings were modest but sufficient. We'd been careful all our lives, saving what we could, never living beyond our means. "Well, if you ever need to talk about the house or anything," Brian said that day, and something in his tone made me look up sharply. But his face was bland, unreadable. I mean, this place is getting old. Must be expensive to maintain. It's our home, I said. We're not going anywhere. Paul had been dozing in his chair, but his eyes opened then, sharp and alert in a way they hadn't been for weeks. He looked at Brian with an expression I couldn't quite read. Later, I'd understand it was disappointment. If you've ever cared for someone with a degenerative disease, you know that there are good days and bad days, and then there are the days when you realize the good days are gone forever. Paul's bad days started outnumbering everything else. In January, 3 months before he died, Paul insisted on meeting with our lawyer, Tom Richardson, an old friend from the Rotary Club. I helped Paul get dressed in his good suit, the one that now hung loose on his shrinking frame. I drove us to Tom's office downtown, helped Paul up the stairs, held his arm as we walked down the hallway. Tom greeted us warmly, then grew serious. Paul, Margaret, I know this isn't easy to talk about, but it's important. Let's make sure everything is in order. Paul's voice was weak but determined. The house goes to Margaret. Everything goes to Margaret. She took care of me. She's the only one who stayed. I remember squeezing his hand, tears in my eyes. Tom nodded, making notes. Clear and straightforward. That's good. And Brian? He'll inherit after Margaret, Paul said. He can wait. She comes first. She always came first. We signed the papers that day. I watched Paul's hand shake as he wrote his name, the signature barely legible but legally his. Tom witnessed it. His secretary notarized it, and we left with copies in a manila envelope that I tucked into my purse. There, Paul said as I drove us home. Now you're protected. No matter what happens, the house is yours. Our home, where we were happy. I thought that was the end of it. I thought we'd taken care of everything. How naive I was. Paul died on a Tuesday in March. The cherry tree in our backyard was just starting to bloom, pink blossoms against a gray sky. I remember thinking how unfair it was that the world could be so beautiful while my heart was breaking into pieces. He went peacefully, the hospice nurse said, though I don't know how anyone can say that with certainty. I was holding his hand when his breathing changed, became shallow and far apart. His eyes opened one last time, found mine, and he whispered words I almost missed. The house is yours, Maggie. Our home. Don't let anyone take it. At the time, I thought he was just being sentimental, saying goodbye to the life we'd built together brick by brick, year by year. Now I know he was giving me a warning. He knew something I didn't. Maybe he'd seen it in Brian's eyes during those uncomfortable visits. Maybe he'd felt the measuring gaze of a son who saw his father as an obstacle rather than a person. The first few weeks after Paul's death passed in a blur of casseroles and condolence cards, phone calls from old colleagues, flowers that filled the house with the cloying smell of forced sympathy. Brian handled the funeral arrangements, which I appreciated at the time. I was too numb to make decisions about caskets and cemetery plots and which psalm should be read. Diane organized a reception at their house after the service. People I'd known for decades patted my hand and told me Paul was in a better place, as if heaven was somehow preferable to sitting in our sunroom listening to jazz. Daniel, my grandson, hugged me briefly, his body stiff and awkward, then disappeared into his room for the rest of the afternoon. I moved through it all like a ghost, not quite present, not quite real. Mom, you should stay with us for a while, Brian said as he drove me home that evening. You shouldn't be alone in that big house. I'll be fine, I said. I need to be in my own space, with my memories. Well, we need to talk about practicalities soon, he said. Dad's affairs, the estate, all that. Soon, I agreed, but not yet. Let me catch my breath first. He nodded, but I saw something flicker across his face. Impatience, maybe. Or calculation. 3 weeks later, the letter arrived. It came from Tom Richardson's office, formal and official. Inside was a photocopy of a will, dated 3 days before Paul's death. My hands started shaking as I read it. The house, our savings, everything was to be transferred to Brian immediately upon Paul's death. My name appeared only once, in a clause that granted me residence in the property for up to 1 year, at the discretion of the primary beneficiary. At the discretion of my son. I called Tom immediately, my voice high and shaky. "Tom, there's been a mistake. This isn't the will we signed. We were in your office in January. You were there. You witnessed it." There was a long pause. "Margaret, I'm sorry. I know this must be confusing, but I received the updated will by courier 2 weeks before Paul passed. It was properly signed and witnessed. Paul's signature, no question." "But he could barely hold a pen by then," I said. "He was on morphine. He wasn't even conscious most of the time." "The document appears legal and valid," Tom said, and his voice had gone professional, distant. "I'm sorry, Margaret. I know this isn't what you expected." I hung up and sat in the kitchen for hours, staring at the letter. My mind kept circling back to one impossible question. How could Paul have signed a new will when he could barely sign his own name? That evening, Brian came over unannounced. He let himself in with the key we'd given him years ago for emergencies. He found me still sitting at the kitchen table, the letter spread out in front of me. "Mom," he said, and his voice was gentle, practiced. "I know you got the letter. I wanted to come explain." "Explain what?" I asked. "Explain how your father, who could barely lift his head off the pillow, somehow signed a completely new will cutting me out of everything we built together." "He didn't cut you out," Brian said, sitting down across from me. "You can still live here." "This is about taxes, Mom. Estate taxes. If the house goes to you first, then to me, the government takes a huge chunk." Dad understood that. He wanted to protect the family assets. "He wanted to protect me," I said. "He told me so. He looked me in the eye and told me the house was mine." Brian sighed, like I was a stubborn child refusing to understand simple math. "He was sick, Mom." Confused. The medication was making him foggy, but in his lucid moments, he understood the financial reality. He wanted to do the right thing for everyone. "Get out," I said quietly. "Mom, get out of my house." My voice was louder now, harder. "Get out and take your lies with you." He stood up slowly. "I'm trying to help you, Mom." "I'm trying to be practical about this. Dad would want us to be smart." "Your father wanted me to have this house," I said. "That's what he wanted. That's what he told me an hour before he died." "He was dying, Mom. People say all kinds of things when they're dying." After he left, I went upstairs to Paul's study, a small room where he'd kept his files and papers. I started going through everything, looking for something, anything that might prove I wasn't losing my mind. And that's when I found it. A small USB drive in the back of Paul's desk drawer, labeled in his careful engineer's handwriting, "Important Documents, January." My hands shook as I plugged it into my old laptop. It took forever to load, and I held my breath, praying for a miracle. There it was, a PDF scan of our will, the real one, dated January 15th, the one where Paul left everything to me, and in the same folder, drafts and notes in a Word document. Paul's thoughts about making sure I was taken care of, his concerns about Brian's priorities, written out plainly in 12-point Times New Roman. "Margaret must have security. The house is hers by right and by love. Brian will inherit when she no longer needs it. This is not negotiable." I read those words over and over, tears streaming down my face. Paul had known. He'd known I might need proof. He'd left me a weapon in the back of a desk drawer, but I didn't know yet what to do with it. The next few weeks were a special kind of hell. Brian started coming by more often, always with Diane, both of them looking at the house with proprietary eyes. They measured rooms, they discussed renovations, they talked about the real estate market in front of me as if I were already gone. "The kitchen is dated," Diane said one afternoon, running her hand over the counter where I'd made thousands of meals. "We'd gut this whole space. Open concept, marble countertops. Mom wouldn't mind, would you, Mom? Brian said. I mean, eventually, when you're ready to move somewhere smaller, more manageable. I'm not moving, I said. Of course not, Diane said quickly. Not right away. But eventually, you'll want something easier. A nice senior community, no yard work, no maintenance. Wouldn't that be lovely? What would be lovely, I thought, is if you both disappeared and left me alone to grieve in peace. They started pressuring me to meet with a real estate agent. Just to get an appraisal, Brian said, just to know what we're working with. They talked about the future as if it had already been decided, as if my life were a problem they needed to solve efficiently. Then came the day that changed everything. I was in the garden, planting tomatoes the way Paul and I had done every spring for 40 years, when Daniel appeared. My grandson, 12 years old and growing tall, with Paul's dark eyes and Brian's sharp chin. He stood at the edge of the garden, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. "Hi, Grandma," he said. "Hi, sweetheart." I wiped dirt off my hands and smiled at him. "What brings you by?" Mom and Dad sent me to get some boxes from the garage. For storage. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "I see," I said. "They're planning ahead, are they?" He shuffled his feet. "Grandma, I heard them talking last night. Dad said you need to go to a nursing home, that you're getting too old to live alone." My heart went cold. Did he now? Mom said it wasn't a nursing home, just an assisted living place. But it sounded the same to me. He finally looked up, and I saw confusion and guilt in his young face. "Are you sick, Grandma? Like Grandpa was?" "No, honey," I said gently. "I'm perfectly healthy. Your father just thinks I need help I don't actually need." "That's what I thought," Daniel said. "You seem fine to me. Better than fine. You still drive and cook and everything." "Thank you for telling me," I said. "That was brave." He nodded and went to the garage. I stayed in the garden, my hands in the dirt, my mind racing. They weren't just taking my house. They were planning to take my freedom, my dignity, my remaining years, and package them into some sterile facility where I'd wither away while Brian sold our home and spent our money. Over my dead body. That night, I made a phone call I'd been avoiding. To Evelyn Carter, my oldest friend, who'd been a civil rights lawyer before she retired. We'd taught at Roosevelt together for 20 years before she went to law school at 45, determined to fight for justice in a more direct way. "Margaret," she said warmly, "I've been worried about you." "How are you holding up?" "Evelyn, I need your help," I said. "I need a lawyer I can trust, and I need someone who's willing to take on my son." There was a pause, then her voice sharpened. "Tell me everything." I did. I told her about the changed will, about Paul's final words, about the USB drive with the original documents. I told her about Brian's plans to put me in a home and sell the house Paul had promised would always be mine. When I finished, Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm coming over tomorrow morning, and we're going to fix this." "Can we?" I asked. "Can we really fix this?" "Margaret, I spent 30 years fighting bigger battles than this," she said. "Your son might have money and lawyers, but he doesn't have the truth. And in the end, the truth is the only weapon that matters." I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her. Evelyn arrived the next morning with a leather briefcase and the determined expression I remembered from her courtroom days. She was 72, short and round, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd been my friend for over 30 years, through good times and bad, through raises and layoffs, through marriages and deaths. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Brian had lied to my face, and I showed her everything. The letter from Tom Richardson's office, the USB drive with Paul's original will, the notes Paul had written about his concerns. Evelyn studied every document with the careful attention of a surgeon examining an X-ray. She made notes in a leather journal, asked questions, went back to reread sections. Finally, she sat back and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "This is forgery," she said quietly. "Clear as day. Your son forged a new will." The words hung in the air like an accusation, like a verdict, like a truth I'd known but couldn't bring myself to say out loud. My son was a thief. My son was a liar. My son had looked at his dying father and seen an opportunity. "Can you prove it?" I asked. "The question isn't whether I can prove it," Evelyn said. "The question is whether you want to. Because if we pursue this legally, it won't be quiet. It won't be private. It'll be public record, family drama for everyone to see." I thought about that. I thought about what Paul would want, what I owed to his memory, what I owed to myself. I thought about spending my final years in some assisted living facility while Brian and Diane renovated my kitchen and erased every trace of the life Paul and I had built. "He needs to face consequences," I said, "not just for stealing from me, but for what he did to his father's final wishes." Paul trusted him. Paul loved him, and Brian betrayed that. Evelyn nodded. "Then we do this carefully. We do this smart, and we do this in a way that gives you back what's rightfully yours." Over the next 2 weeks, Evelyn worked quietly and methodically. She contacted Tom Richardson's office and requested copies of all documents related to Paul's estate. She hired a handwriting expert to examine the signature on the fraudulent will. She pulled phone and email records showing communication between Brian and the courier service that had delivered the fake will to Tom's office. The evidence was damning. The signature on the second will, while a decent forgery, had subtle differences from Paul's actual handwriting. The pen pressure was wrong. The tremor from his Parkinson's was missing. Someone had scanned Paul's signature from another document and painstakingly copied it. "Brian must have used one of Paul's old signatures," Evelyn explained. "Maybe from a birthday card or a letter. He copied it carefully but not perfectly. And the witnesses listed on the document? They don't exist. Made-up names with made-up addresses." "So what do we do?" I asked. "We have options," Evelyn said. "We can go to the police and file charges for forgery and fraud. We can file a civil suit to have the will overturned, or we can handle this privately, within the family, and give Brian a chance to make this right without criminal consequences." I thought about Brian as a little boy, earnest and sweet, bringing me dandelions from the yard and calling them flowers. I thought about teaching him to ride a bike, to tie his shoes, to read. I thought about the son I'd raised and the man he'd become, and I felt the weight of my failure as a mother. But I also thought about Paul, unable to defend himself, his final wishes twisted into something unrecognizable. "I want him to understand what he did," I said. "I want him to face it. But I don't want to destroy him." Evelyn studied me for a long moment. "You're more forgiving than I'd be. But all right. We'll do this your way. We'll give him a chance to come clean." "Not yet," I said, surprising myself. "Not directly. I want to see how far he'll go. I want to know who my son really is. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, you know that the hardest part isn't the betrayal itself. It's the waiting afterward, the watching and wondering if they'll show any remorse, any recognition of the harm they've caused. It's the desperate hope that maybe, somehow, they'll become the person you thought they were." I waited and watched. Brian continued coming by the house, continued making plans, continued talking about my future as if I had no say in it. He brought brochures for senior communities, glossy pages filled with smiling elderly people playing cards and doing yoga. "Look at this place, Mom," he'd say, pointing to pictures of bland, cheerful rooms. "Individual apartments, 3 meals a day, activities planned for you. No more worrying about maintenance or cooking or any of that. Doesn't it look nice? It looks like a warehouse for people waiting to die," I said. "That's not fair," Diane interjected. "These places are lovely. My aunt lives in one and she's very happy." "Your aunt chose to be there," I said. "I'm not choosing this." "Eventually you'll see it's for the best," Brian said, and his tone was the same one he'd used when explaining why he couldn't visit more often, why he couldn't help with Paul's care, why everything he did was actually in my best interest. Meanwhile, Evelyn was building our case. She collected affidavits, organized evidence, prepared documents. She moved like the experienced lawyer she'd been, methodical and thorough. Every time we met, she'd update me on her progress, and every time I'd feel the righteous anger building in my chest. But I also felt something else. Sadness. A deep, aching sadness for the relationship that was already lost, that maybe had never existed in the way I'd believed. Then came the afternoon that pushed me from planning to action. I was in the attic, going through old photo albums, when I heard voices downstairs. Brian's voice, and Diane's, and a third voice I didn't recognize. I moved quietly to the top of the stairs and listened. "As you can see, the house has good bones but needs significant updating," Brian was saying. "We're thinking of listing it in about 3 months, once we've moved my mother into her new place." "The location is excellent," the stranger's voice said. A real estate agent. Brian had brought a real estate agent to my house without telling me. "With some renovations, you could easily get 700,000, maybe more." "That's what we're hoping," Diane said. "It'll be sad to see it go, of course. So many memories. But it's time." I walked down the stairs slowly, deliberately. All 3 of them froze when they saw me. The real estate agent, a young woman in a navy suit, had the grace to look embarrassed. Brian and Diane just looked annoyed, like I'd interrupted an important business meeting. "Mom," Brian said, "this is Jennifer Lewis. We were just getting a preliminary assessment." "Get out," I said quietly. "Mom, don't be dramatic. Get out of my house." My voice was steel. "All of you, now." Jennifer Lewis practically ran to the door. Diane followed more slowly, gathering her purse and jacket. Brian stayed, his jaw tight with frustration. "We're trying to plan ahead, Mom." "That's all. To make things easier when the time comes." "The time has come for you to leave," I said. "And don't come back unless I invite you." "Which I won't." "You're being unreasonable," he said. "You're upset, I understand, but—" "Brian." I stepped closer to him, close enough to see the calculation in his eyes. "Do you remember what your father's last words to me were?" He shifted uncomfortably. "He said a lot of things at the end." "The medication." He said, "Don't let anyone take this house." He said it was mine. He knew, Brian. He knew what you were planning even then. "That's ridiculous," Brian said, but his voice wavered slightly. "Is it? Then explain to me how your father, who could barely hold a spoon, somehow signed a new will 3 days before he died. Explain to me how that will just happen to cut me out and give you everything immediately." "Dad wanted to protect the assets. Dad wanted to protect me," I said. "From you." Brian's face flushed red. "I don't have to listen to this. When you're ready to be rational, call me. Until then, I'm done trying to help you." He left, slamming the door behind him. I stood in the hallway, shaking with anger and adrenaline. Then I picked up the phone and called Evelyn. "It's time," I said when she answered. "I'm ready. Let's do this." "Are you sure?" Evelyn asked. "Once we start, there's no going back." "I'm sure," I said. And I was. Evelyn's plan was elegant in its simplicity. We wouldn't go to the police, not yet. We wouldn't file a lawsuit, not immediately. Instead, we'd give Brian exactly what he'd given Paul, a betrayal delivered by the people he should have been able to trust. Daniel's birthday was coming up in 2 weeks, his 13th birthday, the one Diane had been planning for months. A big party with family and friends, a celebration of his becoming a teenager. Brian had mentioned it several times, always with the suggestion that maybe this would be a good time for me to announce my plans to move to a senior community. "It'd be nice for Daniel to know his grandmother is taken care of," Brian had said. "Settled somewhere safe. He worries about you, you know." I doubted Daniel worried about anything except his video games and girls, but I let it pass. Now that birthday party was going to serve a different purpose. Evelyn and I prepared carefully. We made copies of all the documents, organized them into folders. We created a simple timeline showing the real will, then the forged one, then all the evidence of Brian's deception. We rehearsed what I would say, how I would say it, when I would reveal each piece of the puzzle. "You don't have to do this publicly," Evelyn reminded me more than once. "We can still handle this privately." "No," I said. "He humiliated me. He tried to steal my home and lock me away. He needs to face the truth in front of the people whose respect he wants." The truth is, I wasn't doing this just for justice. I was doing it for closure. I needed to see Brian's face when he realized I knew. I needed him to understand that I wasn't the confused old woman he thought I was. I needed him to see that his mother was still sharp enough to fight back. The morning of Daniel's party, I dressed carefully in a blue dress Paul had always loved. I did my makeup, styled my hair, put on the pearl necklace Paul had given me for our 30th anniversary. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. I looked strong, determined, dangerous. Evelyn picked me up at noon. She was dressed formally, too, in a gray suit that made her look every inch the lawyer she'd been. We drove to Brian's house in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. "Last chance to back out," Evelyn said as we pulled into the driveway. "Not a chance," I said. The party was in full swing when we arrived. Teenagers everywhere, music pounding, decorations in Daniel's school colors. Brian and Diane had spared no expense, as usual. Everything looked perfect, carefully curated, designed to impress. Daniel saw me first and came over, his face lighting up. "Grandma!" "You came. I wasn't sure you would." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I said, hugging him tight. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." "Thanks. And thanks for the gift card. That was generous." "You're my only grandson," I said. "You deserve to be spoiled." Brian and Diane spotted me then, and I watched surprise and calculation flash across Brian's face. He hadn't expected me to come, not after our argument. He crossed the room with a careful smile. "Mom, I'm glad you're here. I know we've had some disagreements, but this is Daniel's day. Let's put all that aside for now." "Of course," I said sweetly. "Family is what matters most." The party continued for another hour. Cake was served, presents were opened, teenagers played games and took endless selfies. I stayed on the periphery, watching and waiting. Evelyn stood beside me, a solid presence, her briefcase at her feet. Finally, as things were winding down, as adults were gathering to chat and teenagers were starting to leave, I made my move. "Brian," I said loudly enough to carry across the room, "could everyone gather for a moment? I'd like to say a few words." Brian looked puzzled, but nodded. "Sure, Mom." "Everyone. Margaret wants to say something." People gathered around, friends and family, neighbors and coworkers. About 30 people in total, including Daniel, who looked curious. Diane stood beside Brian, one hand on his arm. I stood in the center of the room and took a deep breath. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate Daniel's birthday. 13 years old, becoming a man. It's an important milestone." I smiled at my grandson, who smiled back, clearly wondering where this was going. "I've been thinking a lot lately about what we teach our children. About the values we pass down. About integrity and honesty and family loyalty." I paused. My husband Paul, who many of you knew, believed deeply in those values. He was a man of his word. When he made a promise, he kept it. Brian shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, this is nice, but maybe we can—" "Before Paul died," I continued, my voice growing stronger, "he made me a promise. He promised that our house, the home we'd lived in for 43 years, would be mine for as long as I needed it. He put that promise in writing." The room had gone quiet. People were listening now, sensing something beneath the surface. "But after Paul died, something strange happened. A new will appeared. One that cut me out entirely. One that gave everything to Brian immediately." I looked directly at my son. one that Paul supposedly signed 3 days before he died, when he could barely lift his head off the pillow. "Mom, we talked about this," Brian said, his voice tight. Dad was protecting the estate from taxes. It was a financial decision. Was it? I asked. Then explain something to me. Explain how Paul's signature on this new will doesn't match his actual handwriting. Explain how the witnesses listed don't actually exist. Explain how you paid a courier service to deliver this forged document to Tom Richardson's office. Evelyn stepped forward, opening her briefcase. I have all the evidence right here. The original will, properly executed and witnessed, the forged document, the handwriting analysis, the courier receipts, everything that proves Brian Hayes forged his father's will to steal his mother's inheritance. The room erupted. People started talking at once, voices overlapping in shock and disbelief. Diane's face had gone pale. Daniel stared at his father with wide, confused eyes. "That's insane," Brian said, but his voice lacked conviction. "This is my mother's grief talking. She's not thinking clearly. She's making accusations. I have Paul's original voice recording," I said quietly, and the room went silent again. He recorded his intentions on his phone, just in case there was ever any question. "Would you like to hear it?" I pulled out my phone, pressed play, and Paul's voice filled the room, weak and shaky, but unmistakably his. "This is Paul Hayes, and I'm recording this on January 20th. I just met with Tom Richardson to finalize my will. Everything goes to Margaret. The house, the savings, all of it. She's taken care of me through this illness. She's been my partner for almost 5 decades. This house is hers by right and by love. Brian will inherit after she no longer needs it, but Margaret comes first. She always comes first. If anyone tries to change this, they're not acting on my wishes. They're acting against them." The silence after the recording ended was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the weight of 30 pairs of eyes watching Brian's face crumble. "Dad was confused," Brian said weakly. "The medication." "He was lucid," I said. "And he knew you'd try this." "He knew, Brian. Your own father knew you couldn't be trusted." Diane suddenly spoke, her voice shaking. "Brian, tell me you didn't do this. Tell me this is all a misunderstanding." But Brian said nothing. He just stood there, his face red, his hands clenched into fists. And in his silence, he confessed everything. "You tried to steal my home," I said softly. "You tried to lock me away in some facility so you could sell the house your father and I built together. You forged legal documents. You lied to lawyers. You betrayed your dying father's final wishes. And for what? Money? A bigger house? What was worth destroying your integrity?" "You don't understand the financial pressures I'm under," Brian finally said, his voice desperate. "The mortgage, Daniel's school, Diane's car. Everything costs so much. I just thought, you thought you could get away with it," Evelyn interrupted, her voice cold. "You thought your mother was too old, too grief-stricken, too trusting to fight back." Daniel's voice cut through the tension, young and confused and hurt. "Dad? Did you really do this? Did you forge Grandpa's will?" Brian looked at his son, and for a moment I saw something flicker across his face. Shame, maybe. Regret. But it was gone quickly, replaced by defensive anger. "Everyone needs to leave," Brian said. "This is a private family matter. Get out, all of you." People started moving toward the door, gathering coats and purses, whispering to each other. I heard fragments of their conversations. Can you believe it? His own mother. Paul must be rolling in his grave. The gossip would spread through our community like wildfire. By tomorrow, everyone would know what Brian had done. Diane was crying now, quiet tears streaming down her face. Daniel stood frozen, looking at his father like he was seeing a stranger. As the last guests filed out, I walked over to Brian. I stood close enough to see the fear in his eyes, the realization that his carefully constructed life was collapsing around him. I'm giving you one chance, I said quietly. One opportunity to make this right. You have 48 hours to return all documents, sign whatever papers are needed to restore the original will, and transfer any assets you've already taken. If you do that, I won't press charges. I won't file a civil suit. I'll let you salvage what's left of your reputation. And if I don't? Brian asked, though his voice had lost all its fight. Then Evelyn goes to the district attorney on Monday morning with a complete file on your forgery and fraud. You'll face criminal charges. You could go to prison. At the very least, you'll be disbarred from any professional positions that require trust or integrity. Your career will be over. You'd do that to your own son? Diane asked, her voice breaking. He did worse to his own father, I said. Paul couldn't defend himself, but I can. I turned to Daniel, who was still standing there, tears now running down his young face. I went to him and took his hands in mine. I'm sorry you had to see this, sweetheart. I'm sorry your birthday was ruined, but I need you to understand something. What your father did was wrong, deeply wrong. And sometimes, even when we love people, we have to hold them accountable for their actions. I know, Daniel whispered. Grandpa would be so disappointed. Yes, I said gently. He would be. But he'd be proud of you for understanding right from wrong. Don't forget that integrity matters more than money. Character matters more than comfort. Promise me you'll remember that. I promise, Grandma, he said, and hugged me tight. Evelyn and I left then, walking out into the late afternoon sunshine. We didn't speak until we were in her car, driving away from Brian's house. That was brutal, Evelyn finally said. How are you holding up? I don't know, I admitted. I feel like I just declared war on my own child. You declared war on his behavior, Evelyn corrected. There's a difference. And Margaret, you gave him more mercy than he deserved. Most people would have gone straight to the police. I know, I said, but he's still my son. And there's a part of me that hopes, even now, that he'll do the right thing. Do you really think he will? Evelyn asked. I looked out the window at the familiar streets of the neighborhood where I'd lived for so long. I don't know, but I gave him the chance. That's all I can do. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. I stayed home, waiting for Brian to call or show up or send some sign that he was going to make things right. Evelyn checked in twice a day, asking if I'd heard anything, reminding me that we had the legal standing to move forward regardless of Brian's cooperation. He has until Monday at 9 a.m., Evelyn said on Sunday evening. After that, I'm filing everything with the DA, no more extensions. I understand, I said. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house in the dark, touching the walls Paul had painted, the floors we'd refinished together, the door frames where we'd measured Brian's height every year on his birthday. I thought about all the life contained in these rooms, all the love and laughter and ordinary moments that had made up our years together. This house was more than property. It was memory made solid. It was proof that Paul and I had existed, that our love had meant something. At 2 a.m, headlights swept across my living room window, a car in the driveway. I went to the door and found Brian standing there, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes red-rimmed. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside and let him enter. We went to the kitchen and sat at the table where we'd had so many conversations over the years. I made coffee, because that's what you do, even when your heart is breaking. "Diane left me," Brian said finally. "Took Daniel and went to her mother's. She said she can't be married to someone who would do what I did." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "Are you? You destroyed my life on Daniel's birthday in front of everyone we know." "No, Brian," I said firmly. "You destroyed your own life when you decided to forge your father's will. I just brought the truth to light." He was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee cup. When he spoke again, his voice was small, defeated. "I don't know when I became this person. The kind of person who would do something like that. I remember being a kid, and you and Dad teaching me about honesty, about doing the right thing even when it's hard. What happened to that? I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe you started valuing the wrong things. Maybe success and money became more important than integrity. Maybe it happened gradually, one small compromise at a time, until you were someone even you didn't recognize. Dad knew, Brian said. That's what kills me. He knew I'd try something, so he made that recording. He didn't trust me. Can you blame him? I asked. Brian looked up at me then, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine remorse, real shame, the face of the boy he used to be, before ambition and greed had twisted him into someone else. No, he said quietly. I can't blame him. I wouldn't trust me either. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, setting it on the table between us. Everything's in here. The deed transfer paperwork, reversing ownership back to you. Documents restoring the original will as the legal version. A signed confession about what I did. It's all there. I took the envelope but didn't open it. Why? Why are you doing this now? Because Daniel looked at me yesterday like I was a monster, Brian said, his voice breaking. My own son, looking at me with disgust and disappointment, and I realized he was right. I did something monstrous. And for what? This house isn't even worth that much in the grand scheme of things. It's not worth destroying my family over. It's not worth Dad's memory. No, I agreed. It's not. I don't expect you to forgive me, Brian said. I don't expect things to go back to normal. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Not just because I got caught, but because I understand now what I took from you. Dad's final gift to you, his last act of love, and I tried to steal it. That's unforgivable. I sat there, looking at my son across the kitchen table, and felt the complex weight of motherhood pressing down on me. He'd hurt me. He'd betrayed me and his father. He'd tried to take everything from me. And yet, he was still the baby I'd rocked to sleep, the toddler I'd taught to walk, the boy I'd loved with every fiber of my being. I don't forgive you, I said carefully. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What you did cuts too deep. But I acknowledge that you're trying to make it right. That counts for something. What happens now? Brian asked. Now you rebuild your life, I said. You work on your marriage if Diane will let you. You show Daniel that even when we make terrible mistakes, we can still choose to be better. You prove through your actions that you're not the person who forged that will. And us? He asked. You and me? I don't know, I said honestly. Time will tell. But Brian, you're not welcome in this house anymore. Not for a long while. I need space. I need to heal. I need to live in the home your father gave me without feeling like you're waiting for me to leave it. He nodded, tears streaming down his face now. I understand. I'll stay away. I'll do whatever you need. He stood up to leave, then paused at the door. Mom? For what it's worth, Dad was right about you. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. Stronger than me, certainly. Your father was usually right, I said. About most things. After Brian left, I sat alone in the kitchen until dawn, the envelope unopened on the table in front of me. I thought about justice and mercy, about punishment and forgiveness, about the ways we hurt the people we love, and the ways we try to make things right. When the sun finally rose, I called Evelyn. He came, I said. He brought everything. It's over. How do you feel? Evelyn asked. Empty, I admitted. Sad, relieved, all of it at once. That's normal, Evelyn said. You did a hard thing, Margaret. You stood up for yourself. You honored Paul's memory. You should be proud. I just feel tired, I said. Then rest, Evelyn said gently. You've earned it. The legal process of restoring everything took 3 weeks. Evelyn worked with Tom Richardson, who was appropriately mortified to learn he'd been duped. The original will was reinstated. The house was officially deeded back to me. Every document Brian had forged or falsified was corrected. Through it all, I stayed quiet. I didn't talk to reporters, though several called. I didn't post on social media, though friends asked me to share my story. I simply lived my life, quietly and privately, in the home that was finally, legally, unquestionably mine again. The community response was mixed. Some people praised me for standing up to Brian. Others thought I'd been too harsh, airing family business in public. A few people stopped talking to me altogether, either out of loyalty to Brian or discomfort with the whole situation. I didn't care what they thought. I'd learned something important through this ordeal. Other people's opinions, even friends' opinions, mattered less than my own peace of mind and my own integrity. Diane did eventually go back to Brian, though I heard from mutual friends that their marriage was strained. They were in counseling, trying to rebuild trust. I hoped they'd make it, for Daniel's sake, if nothing else. Daniel started calling me every Sunday. Just to talk, he said, just to check in. We'd chat about school and his friends and his worries about the future. He never mentioned what his father had done, and I never brought it up. But I could tell it had changed him, matured him in ways both good and difficult. "Grandma," he said one Sunday in late summer, "I've been thinking about what you said at my birthday." About integrity and character. "Oh?" I said. "I want to be the kind of person who does the right thing, even when it's hard. Even when it costs me something. Like you did." My throat tightened with emotion. "That means everything to me, Daniel. Everything." "Can I come visit you sometime?" he asked. "Just me?" "I miss spending time with you." "Anytime, sweetheart," I said. "The door is always open for you." And he did visit, all through that summer and fall. He'd take the bus from the city every other weekend, and we'd work in the garden together, or watch old movies, or just talk. He told me about his struggles at school, his confusion about who he wanted to be. I listened and offered what wisdom I could, grateful for this second chance at knowing my grandson. Through Daniel, I heard updates about Brian. He'd changed jobs, taking a position that paid less but demanded less of him morally. He'd started volunteering at a community center, teaching financial literacy to low-income families. He was trying, Daniel said, to be better. I didn't know if it was genuine transformation or performative redemption. Time would tell. But I hoped, for his sake and Daniel's, that Brian was finding his way back to the person he'd been raised to be. As for me, I settled into a new rhythm of life. I joined a book club at the local library. I started volunteering at Roosevelt High again, mentoring student teachers. I took up watercolor painting, something I'd always wanted to try. I learned that life after betrayal wasn't just possible, it could be rich and full and meaningful. But I also learned that some wounds don't fully heal. There were nights when I'd lie awake, thinking about Brian's betrayal, feeling the sting of it fresh and sharp. There were moments when I'd see something that reminded me of Paul, and I'd feel the double loss of both my husband and the son I thought I knew. Grief and anger aren't things you overcome once and for all. They're things you carry, sometimes lightly, sometimes like stones in your pockets, weighing you down. One afternoon in October, exactly 7 months after Paul's death, I was in the garden planting spring bulbs when a car pulled up. Not Brian's car. A car I didn't recognize. A woman got out, older than me, with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a bun. "Mrs. Hayes?" she said. "I'm Carol Bennett. I was Paul's nurse at the end. I hope it's all right that I came by." "Of course," I said, standing and brushing dirt from my knees. "Please, come in." We sat in the sunroom where Paul had spent his final weeks, and Carol accepted my offer of tea. She seemed nervous, turning the cup in her hands. "I've been struggling with whether to tell you this," she finally said. "It's been eating at me for months. But I think you deserve to know." My heart started beating faster. "Know what?" "Your son came to see your husband 3 times in those last 2 weeks," Carol said. "I was there for 2 of the visits. And Mrs. Hayes, Brian brought paperwork with him. He'd ask your husband to sign things, telling him they were insurance forms or pension documents. Your husband was so out of it on the pain medication that he barely knew what he was signing. I felt cold all over. You watched him do this? I didn't know what the papers were at the time, Carol said, her voice anguished. I just thought it was normal family business. But after I heard about the will controversy, about everything that happened, I realized what I'd witnessed. I should have said something at the time. I should have checked. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, I said automatically. You were taking care of Paul. That was your job. But if I'd been more vigilant, Carol said, if I'd questioned what Brian was doing, he would have found another way, I said firmly. People determined to do wrong will always find a way. You couldn't have stopped him. I have something for you, Carol said, pulling an envelope from her purse. The last day I saw your husband conscious, truly conscious, he asked me to give you this. He made me promise. And then he slipped back into the morphine haze and never really came back. She handed me the envelope. My name was written on the front in Paul's shaky handwriting. I opened it with trembling fingers and found a single sheet of paper inside. My dearest Maggie, Paul had written, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry to leave you. I'm sorry for a lot of things, but mostly I'm sorry if I didn't protect you well enough from the future. I've tried. I've made arrangements, but I know Brian, and I know what he might try. Don't let him take what's yours. Don't let him steal our life together. The house is yours. I put everything in order for you. If Brian tells you otherwise, he's lying. Trust yourself. Trust what you know to be true. You were the love of my life. You made every day worth living. Don't let anyone diminish that or take it from you. With all my love, always, Paul. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Carol sat quietly, letting me have my moment. He knew, I finally said. He knew exactly what Brian would try. He loved you very much, Carol said softly. That was clear to everyone who saw you together. After Carol left, I sat in the sunroom holding Paul's letter, feeling his presence so strongly it was almost like having him back. He'd tried to protect me, even from his deathbed. He'd left me weapons and warnings, trust and truth, and I'd used them. I'd fought back. I'd won. I did it, Paul, I whispered to the empty room. I kept our home. I honored your wishes. Justice was finally served. Winter came, then spring. The cherry tree in the backyard bloomed again, pink and glorious, marking a year since Paul's death. I stood beneath it on a warm April morning, thinking about everything that had happened, everything I'd learned. I'd learned that family isn't just blood, it's choice and loyalty, and showing up when things are hard. Evelyn was more family to me than Brian had been. Daniel, in his way, was choosing to be family by calling every week and visiting when he could. I'd learned that forgiveness isn't always necessary or even possible. Some betrayals cut too deep to heal completely. And that's okay. You can move forward without forgiving. You can build a good life on the foundation of anger, transformed into strength. I'd learned that justice doesn't always come from courts and lawyers. Sometimes it comes from speaking truth in a room full of people. Sometimes it comes from refusing to be a victim, from standing up and saying, no, this is wrong, and I won't accept it. Most importantly, I'd learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. At 70 years old, having lost my husband, having been betrayed by my son, I'd fought back and won. Not just legally, but personally. I'd reclaimed my power, my voice, my right to live on my own terms. The house was quiet around me, but it wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. It was mine. In June, I finally did something I'd been planning for months. I established the Paul Hayes Memorial Scholarship Fund, endowing it with a significant portion of our savings. It would support students from low-income families who wanted to study engineering or education. Students who understood that success meant building things, helping people, leaving the world better than you found it. The first scholarship was awarded in September. A young woman named Maria, whose father was a construction worker and whose mother cleaned houses. She wanted to be a civil engineer, to design bridges in underserved communities. When I met her at the scholarship ceremony, I saw the same determination in her eyes that I'd seen in Paul's all those years ago. "Thank you," Maria said, shaking my hand. "This scholarship changes everything for me. I won't forget it." "Pay it forward," I told her. "When you're successful, when you've built your bridges, remember someone believed in you. And believe in someone else." Daniel was at the ceremony too. 14 now, taller and more serious than he'd been a year ago. After the event, we walked through the park near the community college where the scholarship had been presented. "Dad asked me to give you something," Daniel said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. He wanted me to deliver it. He said it was important. I took the envelope, my name written on the front in Brian's handwriting. Inside was a letter and a check. "Mom," the letter began, "I don't expect you to cash this check or even read this letter." But I needed to try. "The check is for the scholarship fund, in Dad's name. It's not enough. Nothing could be enough. But it's what I can afford right now, and I wanted to contribute to something that honors him the right way. I've spent the last year trying to understand how I became someone who would betray you and Dad. I've been in therapy. I've been reading about ethics and integrity. I've been trying to become the person you raised me to be. I'm not there yet. Maybe I'll never be. But I'm trying. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that I finally understand what I did. I stole more than money or property. I stole your peace. I stole your trust. I stole Dad's final gift to you. Those are things I can never give back. But I can try to be better going forward. I can try to teach Daniel what I failed to learn. I can try to make Dad proud, even if it's too late. I hope the scholarship fund succeeds. I hope it helps students who deserve a chance. I hope, in some small way, it makes up for the damage I caused. With regret and respect, Brian." The check was for $5,000. Not a fortune, but not nothing either. Enough to fund another semester for a deserving student. I stood there in the park, holding my son's letter, feeling the complicated weight of it. He was trying. Maybe not successfully, maybe not enough, but he was trying. That didn't erase what he'd done. It didn't repair our relationship. But it was something. "Are you going to cash it?" Daniel asked. "Yes," I said. "I'll put it toward the scholarship fund. If your father wants to honor your grandfather's memory this way, I won't stop him." "Does that mean you forgive him?" Daniel asked hopefully. I thought about that question carefully. "No, sweetheart. I don't forgive him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What he did was too big, too hurtful. But I acknowledge that he's trying to be better. And that's enough for now." "I think that's fair," Daniel said quietly. "I don't forgive him either. But I'm trying to give him a chance to prove he's changing. That's all I can do." "That's all any of us can do," I agreed. It's been 2 years now since Paul died. 2 years since Brian forged that will and tried to steal my life. 2 years since I fought back and won. I'm 72 years old, and I live alone in the house on Maple Street, the house that Paul promised me, the house that's mine by right and by love. Some days are hard. Some days I miss Paul so much I can barely breathe. Some days I think about Brian and feel the old anger rising up, sharp and bitter. Some days I wonder if I did the right thing, exposing him the way I did, destroying his reputation in front of everyone we knew. But most days, I feel peace. I feel the rightness of living in this house, tending this garden, building this life on my own terms. I feel proud that I stood up for myself when it mattered. I feel grateful for friends like Evelyn who stood beside me. I feel hopeful when I see students like Maria working toward their dreams with the help of Paul's scholarship fund. Real family, I've learned, is the people who actually want you there, the people who show up, the people who choose you again and again, even when it's hard. Daniel is real family. He still calls every Sunday. He still visits every month. We've built something together, a relationship based on honesty and respect and genuine affection. Evelyn is real family. She checks on me, invites me to dinners, includes me in her life without expecting anything in return. Brian? I don't know what Brian is anymore. We speak occasionally, brief and polite conversations that skim the surface of things. He sends cards on holidays. He contributes to the scholarship fund regularly. He's trying in his way to make amends. Maybe someday I'll forgive him. Maybe someday we'll rebuild something that resembles a relationship. But for now, this distance between us feels right. Necessary. Earned. Tonight, I'm sitting in the sunroom where Paul spent his final days. The sun is setting, painting the sky orange and pink. The cherry tree in the backyard is starting to bloom again, its third spring since Paul left. I'm holding a cup of tea and Paul's letter, the one Carol gave me, the one I've read 100 times. "Trust yourself," Paul wrote. "Trust what you know to be true." I did trust myself. I did know the truth. And I fought for it. That day, 2 years ago, standing in Brian's living room with Evelyn beside me, playing Paul's voice recording for everyone to hear, justice was finally served. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. For the first time in a long time, I feel free. Free from fear, free from uncertainty, free from worrying about who I can trust. I know who I am. I know what I'll accept and what I won't. I know I'm strong enough to stand alone if I have to. But I also know I'm not alone. I have my memories of Paul. I have my friendship with Evelyn. I have my growing relationship with Daniel. I have this house, these walls, this life I've built and reclaimed. And I have the quiet satisfaction of knowing I didn't let anyone take what was mine. I didn't let betrayal break me. I turned pain into power and grief into action. I'm 72 years old, and I'm not done yet. I have plans to expand the scholarship fund. I'm thinking about writing a book about teaching literature, sharing what I learned over 47 years in the classroom. I might travel next summer, visit places Paul and I always talked about seeing. I have life left to live. And I'll live it in this house, the one Paul promised me, the one I fought to keep. I'll live it on my own terms, with my own choices, surrounded by people who genuinely care about me. That's victory. That's justice. That's peace. As I sit here watching the sunset, I think about everything that happened, everything I learned, and I think about you, whoever you are, listening to my story. Maybe you've been betrayed by someone you love. Maybe you felt the sting of family turning against you. Maybe you've wondered if you're strong enough to fight back. Let me tell you something I learned. You are strong enough, stronger than you know, and you deserve better than betrayal. You deserve truth and respect and the life you've earned. Don't let anyone take that from you. Stand up, fight back, trust yourself. Because in the end, justice isn't something that happens to you. It's something you create. It's a choice you make, every day, to honor your worth and defend your truth. I made that choice, and I'd make it again. What would you have done?